Lock the doors, cancel your plans, put your phone on Do Not Disturb, because what you are about to hear is not a rumor, not a hot take, and not another internet whisper that fades by morning. This is the moment the entire rap landscape has been quietly bracing for since the dust settled in 2024. And tonight, the executioner is sharpening the blade in absolute silence, while the loudest man in the building keeps screaming into a microphone that nobody is listening to anymore. Drake just unloaded 3 full albums in a single 24-hour stretch: Iceman, Maid of Honor, and Habibi, a digital avalanche of 43 songs designed to drown the timeline, hijack the conversation, and convince the planet that he is still the king of the genre. And right as the last echo of his self-coronation faded into the streaming algorithms, a name dropped out of the shadows that turned every single one of those 43 tracks into background noise: Kendrick Lamar, the man who already buried him once, the man who has been moving like a ghost for 2 solid years, the man whose camp just confirmed in plain English that something massive is loading. So before we go a single sentence further, do me a favor, smash that like button into oblivion, subscribe if you have not already, and drop a comment so the algorithm shoves this video into every Drake fan's feed, because they need to see what their hero just walked himself into. This is not a takedown video. This is an obituary in progress. Let me set the table, because the entire weight of what is coming only makes sense once you understand the wreckage Drake just dragged into the room. In a single calendar day, the man dropped 3 albums, 3 back to back to back, like a desperate gambler shoving every chip onto a single number on a roulette wheel he already lost on. Iceman, Maid of Honor, Habibi, 43 songs of overproduced filler, recycled flows, and what can only be described as the lyrical equivalent of a flooded basement. He called it his magnum opus. He called it the comeback nobody saw coming. He called it the chapter that would reset the entire pecking order of the genre. What it actually is, plain and simple, is the loudest cry for relevance the genre has heard in a decade. Because when an artist drops 1 album, that is a statement. When an artist drops 2, that is ambition. But when an artist drops 3 on the same day with that much overlap, that much padding, that much desperate stretching to fill out a track list, that is not a comeback. That is a flare gun. That is a man on a sinking ship firing every signal he has, hoping somebody, anybody, will look his way and pretend he is still the captain. And listen, I already hear the Drake defenders typing furiously, sliding into the comments to remind me that the streaming numbers will be enormous, that the playlists will be flooded, that the cloud-chasing publications will hand him glowing reviews because the machine behind him is too big to fail openly. Sure, enjoy the streaming inflation, enjoy the algorithm boost, because when an artist quadruples the song count of every peer in his tier, of course the raw numbers are gonna look loud. That is not greatness, that is gaming a system, and there's a price tag attached to gaming that system, because the moment you take swings at this many powerful people across 43 songs, every single one of them now holds a coupon they can redeem whenever they choose. A$AP Rocky, J. Cole, Jay-Z, every name that caught a subliminal across this 3-album bloodbath now has a permanent invitation to walk back into the room and dismantle Drake at the exact moment of their choosing. And the lawsuit? The lawsuit does not save him. The lawsuit does not silence the genre. The lawsuit does not buy back the dignity he just torched on his own coronation weekend. But here's where the temperature in the room changes, because while Drake was busy dumping 43 songs into the ocean and pretending it was a tidal wave, the people closest to Kendrick Lamar were sitting in a room, listening to Iceman, reacting in real time, and quietly preparing the answer. And we know this is not a guess. We know this is not fan fiction, because the source is not some random blogger or anonymous insider account. The source is Smack. Yes, that Smack, the man who has been photographed on stage at the pop-out with Kendrick himself, the man who was standing on the set of the Not Like Us video shoot, a figure embedded so deeply inside the Top Dog Entertainment ecosystem that whatever he says is essentially the voice of the camp itself. And what did Smack say on the record after sitting with the Iceman fallout? He looked into the camera, calm, deliberate, no theatrics, and delivered the kind of sentence that should haunt Drake's sleep for the next several weeks. Mark his words, something big is happening. That's all he can say. Watch this. Pause on that for a second, because in the language of inner circle leaks, sentences that short are never small. The smaller the sentence, the bigger the bomb. When an insider says nothing, that means nothing is happening. When an insider says everything, that usually means nothing is happening either, because the people who actually know never spill the details. But when a figure that close to the throne walks up to a camera and uses the phrase, "mark my words," with that calm, with that confidence, with that bone-deep certainty, that is not a tease. That is a countdown clock disguised as a sentence. And right now, that clock is ticking down behind every single thing Drake just released.
Now let me explain why this hits Drake like a freight train, because the timing is not just unfortunate for him, the timing is catastrophic. Think about the state of the so-called Big Three heading into 2026. J. Cole already delivered his defining post-feud statement with a sprawling double project widely regarded as the most ambitious work of his career. Drake has now emptied the entire vault, the entire arsenal, the entire creative inventory of his label-backed machinery into a 43-song carpet bomb, which means the only domino left standing on the board is the one belonging to the man who never speaks until it is time to end somebody, Kendrick Lamar. The other two members of the supposed Trinity have already swung. They have already showed their hands. They have already played their cards, which means whatever Kendrick is sitting on right now does not have to compete with anything. It does not have to share oxygen with anything. It does not have to fight for headlines with anyone. The stage is empty, the lights are dimmed, the crowd is waiting, and the assassin has the entire room to himself. That is not a coincidence. That is choreography. And here's the part the Drake camp does not seem to understand. Even after all of this, Kendrick was waiting for exactly this. He was waiting for Drake to overplay his hand. He was waiting for Drake to flood the market with so much content that the public could see with their own eyes that there is no edit button, no quality filter, no creative discipline at the helm anymore. Because the moment Drake unleashed 3 albums in a single day, the moment he stuffed the timeline with 43 songs, the moment he sat on Iceman with the writers and the directors and the visual departments crafting little cinematic skits about a fictional version of Kendrick, that moment, Drake handed his rival the cleanest, widest, most unobstructed runway any contender has ever been handed in the modern history of this genre. The path is paved, the lights are on, the plane is fueled, and Kendrick has not even stepped onto the tarmac yet. Let me walk you through the signals, because they are louder than people realize. Start with the Grammys, the 2026 ceremony, where Kendrick walked the carpet with his hand visibly wrapped, no explanation given, no statement released, no follow-up offered. In any other artist's universe, that would have been a footnote. In Kendrick's universe, nothing is a footnote. Every image is calibrated, every detail is rehearsed, every visual choice has a downstream meaning, and Dave Free, longtime collaborator, creative architect, and the man who has been quietly steering the visual language of this entire era, was very clear in his own measured way that the moment was worth paying attention to. That alone is a fuse. Now stack onto that the testimony of Isaiah Rashad, a TDE veteran who has been around Kendrick for over a decade and has zero reason to hype anything for clout. His description of Kendrick's current studio rhythm: he is in there more often now than ever before. Let that detail land. A man who already broke the genre in 2024, a man who already won the biggest battle of his career, a man who already cemented his legacy on stage at the biggest televised event in American culture, is currently locked inside the studio at a higher rate than at any other point in his life. That is not the energy of a man done with his run. That is the energy of a man preparing the finishing blow. Add to that the whispers from Jack Antonoff, the production architect who has been quietly attached to Kendrick's recent process. The recurring theme across every single one of these collaborators is the same: he never leaves. He is always working, he is always sculpting, and nobody around him is allowed to say what it is. Now combine that with what just dropped out of Smack's mouth, and you start to see the full picture. There is something loaded, there is something polished, there is something cued, and whatever it is now sitting in a launch window that just got an empty sky by Drake's own decision to scorch the entire calendar by himself. Because here's the thing the Iceman war room failed to calculate. When you dedicate visual real estate across an entire 3-album rollout to mocking your rival, staging characters that mimic his haircut from his 50 Cent Power appearance, choreographing movements that mirror his Rich Spirit music video, building little punchlines into songs that are essentially knockoff versions of records he already perfected, you are not diminishing him, you are advertising him. Every frame Drake spent dressing up a fake Kendrick is another frame the audience spent thinking about the real one. Every short joke he sneaked into a track is another reminder of who he is still trying to claw his way past. Every visual reference to Not Like Us is another reminder of the song that broke the internet, broke the charts, and broke the entire mythology Drake had spent 15 years constructing. He didn't diss Kendrick on this rollout. He decorated his own funeral with his rival's face.
And let me say this very carefully, because this is the part most of the hot take crowd is missing. If you actually sit inside Kendrick's shoes and listen to the Iceman album, the disses, the staged scenes, the recycled subliminals, the references to a man Drake is currently in active legal proceedings with, the only possible reaction is laughter. Not anger, not concern, not retreat. Laughter. Because the bars themselves are not landing. The short jokes are not landing. The hand gesture moment in the visual album where Drake tries to mock the way Kendrick performed Not Like Us at the pop-out, that is not a disrespect. That is a confession. That is Drake admitting that the most threatening creative reference point in his entire arsenal is still the man he is supposed to be beating. He is not painting over Kendrick's legacy, he is studying it, frame by frame, and trying to remix it with a smaller budget and a smaller imagination. Now, I want to be responsible here for a moment because not everything floating around online has been independently verified. The chatter about a specific release date, the rumors about a specific project title some fans are already calling KL7 because it would mark his 7th studio album, the speculation about a possible single, an EP, a visual project, a feature, or a full body of work, none of that has been officially confirmed in writing by Kendrick himself or by Top Dawg as a formal announcement. What we have are signals. What we have are credible insiders speaking in deliberate terms. What we have are studio patterns, visual cues, and the loudest possible behavioral evidence from a camp that historically does not waste public statements on bluffs. So treat the timing as unconfirmed. Treat the format as unconfirmed. But treat the direction as obvious, because every credible breadcrumb is pointing the same way. Now, stack that against what Drake actually delivered on these 3 albums, because somebody has to say it. Iceman is the only one of the 3 projects that even qualifies as listenable by any objective metric, and that is not a compliment, that is a diagnosis. Maid of Honor includes, and I am not making this up, you can check for yourself, a cover-style reference to the Cha-Cha Slide on what is supposed to be a high-stakes statement album from the self-proclaimed biggest rapper alive. Habibi is essentially atmospheric filler, and Iceman itself only feels coherent because it is powered from start to finish by an obsession with the very man it is trying to bury. Strip out the Kendrick references, the Kendrick-coded sonic borrowing, the Kendrick-shaped scene design, and what is left? A handful of vibes records and a stack of tracks like Too Hard for the Radio, a record so transparently modeled on the energy of Not Like Us and Squabble Up that even the supporters can hear the blueprint underneath. The Iceman album is not a Drake album. It is a Kendrick fanfiction album dressed in Drake's clothes. Here is the most damning detail of all. The cleanest, sharpest, most fully realized song on the entire 3-album rollout, depending on who you ask, is the one most openly imitating his rival. Which means the man's best work in this entire era is the work that sounds the least like himself. Sit with that. The supposed king of the genre, on the most important release of his career, performs at his peak only when he is mimicking the artist he is trying to defeat. There is no rebuttal to that. There is no spin. There is no Drake Stan paragraph that can soften that conclusion. The data is right there in the track list. And while all of that is happening, while the algorithms are working overtime to keep Iceman trending, while the supporters are scrambling to anoint the album as a return to form, the most important fact in the entire genre right now is the one nobody on the Drake side is willing to say out loud. The audience is not waiting for Drake's next move. The audience is waiting for Kendrick's next move. The hate watching is not love. The streaming spikes are not loyalty. The trending placements are not respect. They are the slow, public reveal of an audience that has already pivoted its emotional investment to the man who hasn't even spoken yet. Drake spent 43 songs trying to control the conversation, and the only thing the conversation actually wants to talk about is what's coming for him next. Think of it this way. Drake's team tried to brand this entire chapter as a takeover, as a bat signal calling him back to his throne. The reality is, the bat signal did get lit. It just wasn't lit for him. It was lit by him, against himself, for the man waiting in the dark. Every diss multiplied the demand for the response. Every cinematic skit raised the ceiling for the eventual answer. Every short joke, every recycled flow, every visual jab pushed the public anticipation higher and higher for whatever Kendrick decides to drop next. Drake didn't just clear the runway, he printed the boarding passes, fueled the plane, and announced the departure gate over the loudspeaker. All Kendrick has to do is walk on.
And let me drive this home with the part that should genuinely concern the Drake camp. When Smack said something big is coming, he was not selling merch, he was not promoting an event, he was not building hype for clicks. He was talking, on camera, in the middle of a reaction to a rival's album, and he chose his words like a man who already knows what is in the chamber. In the inner circle language of TDE, that level of restraint always precedes a release window. They do not announce, they detonate. They do not hint, they unveil. And once that pattern locks in, the timeline is not measured in months anymore. It is measured in weeks, sometimes in days, sometimes in a single Friday morning that rearranges the entire genre overnight. So picture the scenario. Picture the Friday, and it is coming, whether it arrives in 2 weeks, 2 months, or 2 announcements from now, when the notification finally drops. Picture the silence right before the upload. Picture the timeline pivoting in real time. Picture every Iceman streaming chart instantly recontextualized as the warm-up act. Picture Drake, 3 albums deep into a self-funded victory lap, watching his own headlines vaporize the moment his rival's name returns to the top of the trending tab. Because that is the math here. That is the inevitability. That is what every signal, from the Grammys to the studio hours, to the TDE insider quotes, to the visual breadcrumbs, to the empty competitive calendar, is collectively pointing toward. Drake did not delay Kendrick, Drake summoned him. And the most painful realization for the Drake side, the part that no amount of label spin can rewrite, is that this entire moment was self-inflicted. Nobody forced him to drop 3 albums. Nobody forced him to fill those albums with subliminals aimed at half the genre. Nobody forced him to stage cinematic skits about Kendrick's hairstyle, Kendrick's height, Kendrick's gestures. Nobody forced him to take pot shots at Mac Dre's legacy on the West Coast in a way that the people who actually knew Mac Dre, the people closest to his life and his music, are publicly saying he would not have respected. Nobody forced him to swing at A$AP Rocky, at J. Cole, at Jay-Z in passing on the same project where he was already losing the main fight. Every move was his. Every line was his. Every diss is now a permanent invitation for every dissed party to walk into the building whenever they choose, and there is no lawsuit on earth that can revoke that invitation. So where does this leave us? It leaves us in the calmest, most dangerous silence the genre has seen since the spring of 2024. It leaves Drake holding the loudest microphone in the room and slowly realizing that nobody is in the audience anymore. It leaves Kendrick sitting inside whatever studio he has called home for the past several months, knowing the table has been set, knowing the diners are seated, knowing the lights are dimmed, and knowing he is the only chef the room actually wants to hear from. It leaves the rest of us, the people who actually love this culture, the people who actually understand what makes a moment historic, counting down to the inevitable, the way a city counts down on New Year's Eve. Because whether it is a single, an album, a visual drop, a surprise stage appearance, or something none of us have even imagined yet, the next time Kendrick Lamar's name surfaces officially, the entire calculus of this era flips again. And when it does, when that moment finally arrives, do not be surprised. Do not act shocked. Do not pretend you didn't see it coming, because the signs were everywhere. The TDE insider laid the breadcrumb. The Grammys appearance laid the breadcrumb. The studio hours laid the breadcrumb. The Dave Free signals laid the breadcrumb. And Drake himself, with 3 albums of unforced errors, laid the loudest breadcrumb of them all. The executioner did not have to announce himself. The condemned man did it for him. So tell me in the comments, when do you think the return arrives? Tell me how big you think it lands.
Tell me whether you believe this is the final closing chapter of the rivalry or just the prologue to something even larger. Tell me whether the entire Iceman experiment will be remembered as the loudest miscalculation in modern rap history. And tell me whether in retrospect you saw all the signals before they were obvious. Because this is the kind of moment people lie about witnessing in real time once it becomes part of the canon. And you, right now, watching this video, are witnessing it in real time. Smash that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. Drop a comment so the algorithm knows this story needs to spread. And stick around, because the next chapter is closer than anyone on Drake's side is willing to admit. The runway is empty, the signals are stacked, the insiders are speaking, the calendar is clear, and the man who already buried him once is standing in the dark, finger hovering over the upload button, waiting for the exact second to send the entire genre into its next earthquake. Drake just walked himself, microphone in hand, 3 albums deep, straight into the most dangerous silence of his career. And the silence is about to break.